I'd like to thank all of you, certainly Inessa, Madeline, and PyLadies Southwest Florida, Miami PyLadies, for inviting me and having me today, and also all, I believe, 100,000 of the other organizations that are together on this today. Um, and I want to thank anybody who is watching. I believe we now have a total of 11 well, 10 participants because I'm duplicated for my video and my screen sharing, and 10 participants live. And then, of course, how many will watch this on YouTube or similar venues? Do you ever think about the fact that we don't really have an end date on that? You know, this video will go up and we don't know if or when it will ever come down. And it could be like thousands of years from now that someone stumbles across it and watches it for almost like archaeological and anthropological reasons to understand why we did the things we did, why we didn't do things we didn't do. Sorry. So I really just wanted to say thank you for if you are watching this afterwards asynchronously on YouTube or some subsequent platform, whether you are human, alien, robot, or some interesting hybrid of all of them. Hello and welcome. I want to be inclusive. PyLadies is about inclusivity, right? So, all right. I have pasted a link into the chat of the Zoom, and I believe perhaps one of you has already also put it in the meetup description or comments, because I know how annoying it can be when you would like to follow along with what someone's doing and there's no way to copy and paste. I'm not using any slides today. Instead, I have a giant markdown file that intersperses the things I'm going to orally say to you, like a person, and then the things I'm going to tap in the terminal. And it's not like one giant elegant thing that you can just run. I did not prepare to that level. I'm sure some people would have. They did not make this trip today. So I will now go ahead and share my screen on one of these multiple objects. And I'll, you can see my screen. Yes. Okay. So this is the first part of tonight is a few Python tips. And after I get through all of the tap, then I'm going to start the yap, where I just ramble at some length, depending on how long people want to stick around, about my career. I mean, the word career is also a verb that means just like to swerve around, And I think not enough of us think about that as perhaps one of the important meanings of the word career. So, I'll get to that later. But first, a few Python tips. So I'm presenting a few tips to help you work effectively with Python. And this talk is aimed at a variety of people, right? You might be an experienced programmer you're experienced to a different scripting language and you're getting into Python now. And also, I hope it's going to be useful to people who are new programmers for whom Python is your first language. It could be that everyone listening already knows all of this stuff, in which case I hope to at least be slightly amusing and to like have some dynamic range in my voice. Maybe you're stuck at home and you're just like, oh, kind of virtual human contact, even though you're saying things I already know. Basically, there's a few things you could get out of this, and I hope at least one of them works out. This is based on a talk I gave back in 2014. The notes from that are also up. That was, back in the days when I said, oh, well, you should use Python 2, which I regret now. Perhaps I should have worked harder to get everyone to use Python 3. And I thought I knew enough about things like package management and installation. And so I was very blithe and glib in what I said in a way that I now think wasn't so great. So this talk is not going to discuss programming basics, why you might choose to work in Python. It's not going to discuss web frameworks like Django and Flask. I'm not going to talk about very specific Python packaging projects such as wheel and setup tools. I'm not going to talk about NumPy, SciPy, other scientific distributions. I'm really aiming just for breadth rather than depth, because the point here is just to give you a little taste of a lot of useful stuff and show you just enough to see why I use some of the things I use. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for any one thing. I'm going to talk a bit about initial setup tips, about some useful tools and debugging techniques, like interpreters and PDB, and a few favorite modules, mostly things that are actually already in the standard library, but I just think they don't get enough attention. You ever have that? Like, you're just like, I know you have it, but like, have you ever really looked at it? So, uh, as you can tell, I decided to stop sharing my screen for a second just so you could see my excited face for just slightly longer. Uh, so, back to the screen share. Okay. So, I was one of the people who helped communicate out about Python 3 and the transition, because I am a consultant, I'm a contractor, and I worked on getting the word out that, hey, people should really switch to Python 3. So, what I will be doing today is using Python 3. It came out in 2008. Lots of people and organizations have been transitioning over to it. If you're writing new code, I really hope you will write it in Python 3. There's nearly no libraries or dependencies out there that can only work with Python 2, the old version, and it's less and less of a problem over time. And I've put a link in this Markdown document to the Q&A that I wrote about that. The examples I'm going to give you are Python 3, just because that is the default, still on, or the Python. I need to update that phrasing. Python 3 because it should be the default on systems when you run Python. And installing Python onto any given machine is a complicated enough issue. I am not going to talk about it in any depth today, because it depends so much on what operating system you're running, Windows, Mac, some variety of Linux, whether everyone in your organization is doing things in some particular way. If everybody else is, getting binaries onto their computer in some mass managed way, then, you should probably go with what your IT department wants, at least to start. And also whether you're doing a lot of science and data analysis, because then perhaps you'd like to go the conda anaconda route. If you don't know those nouns, talk to other people in a peer setting about them. It is okay if you don't know them. This stuff is more complicated than it should be. It's not your fault. I think that how easy it is to install Python and get a working installation going is a problem, right? In knitting, as I understand it, when people start learning to knit, one of the really difficult things is the moment of like trying to get the yarn onto the needles just so you can do something useful with it and actually start making the special knots. That's called casting on. And it's known to be a really annoying, difficult problem. People who are teaching somebody else how to knit will often do the casting on for them so that you can give to the friend, okay, look, here's the needles already set up. Now all you have to do is move the needles to make the knots of the yarn. And I wish it were easier to do that with Python. So my anybody who's watching this who's really very new, my apologies to you. It shouldn't be that hard. It is not your fault. So there's one more aspect of setup I am going to talk a little bit about, and that's the world of packages, installing packages and virtual environments. There is a really excellent website that is the official Python packaging user guide at packaging.python.org. There's a link to that in that Markdown document. And it is important for a particular reason that I want to say, less probably for the 11 other people here, 10 other people here, but and more for possibly the audience after. If you are going to write things that other people use, write software that other people use, especially if it's going to be in any way complicated and have to do a bunch of stuff at once, probably you're not going to write every single line of that code from scratch. You will probably be standing on the shoulders of giants. You will be reusing the like Lego bricks that other people made. And when you make something good that you'd like other people to use, you probably want to turn it into a Lego brick that other people can put in their buckets and they can build stuff with. So those reusable little bits, some of them are so useful. Like, you know what? Probably a lot of people are going to want those, that the people who maintain the core Python programming language have them in what's called the standard library. It just comes bundled with Python, and you don't need to download anything from the internet. It's already going to be on your computer, and you need to call upon it using the word import when you want to use it in your code. But we also write new ones and we need to pass them around in some way. So we call those packages. and one developer wraps something up that was just called packaging, and then perhaps they upload it to some shared place, right, on the internet, and then someone else can download and install it, right? And that's the distribution step. And the most widely used of these platforms on the internet where people share reusable Python code in this way is PyPI, the Python Package Index at pypi.org. And so that's where most of the Python ecology lives in terms of reusable Python code. PyPI.org, I have worked on it. I'm glad it exists. And it is run by the Python Software Foundation, which is a nonprofit. And during the Q&A, feel free to ask me why it's important that the PSF that runs PyPI is a nonprofit. It is driven and run by the community space. So Python 3 by default comes with pip, which is the official supported package installer for Python. And you can use pip to download and install packages from the Python package index, but also other places. I could put something into an email attachment and email it to you, and you could use pip to install it. Or you can set up inside a company, right, a proxy or a small um, platform, right? And that can be the place where you put your packages, and then you can still install them with pip, but they don't, go out in the public internet. Uh, this is a public service request / announcement. So I am currently the project manager for pip, and we'll be putting out a new release probably tomorrow, pip 20.3. This will have some fairly large changes in how pip works. Juan, I see that you're nodding, right? Can you unmute and say, how do you
I'm so
feel
scared.
about the fact that pip is making these changes?
I feel scared. We'll see.
Okay. Did you do any testing on 20.2?
I did when I remembered, but I didn't always remember.
Okay. Well, 20.3 also has a beta that's out right now in case you want to run it against that. 20.3 beta 1.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are some big changes in what's called the dependency resolver. And that's outside the scope of what we'll talk about here today. But as part of this effort, we got some grant funding to massively do some really long overdue improvements to pip. And one of the things that we did was we hired some user experience experts. And so we're looking for pip users to talk to about a number of things. And one of them is documentation. Even if you've never used pip before, or if you used pip a lot, whether you've ever looked at the documentation for pip or not, we would love to interview you. So there's a link there in the Markdown document in that GitLab, bit.ly/pip-docs-interview. So we would love to sign you up and talk with you about pip documentation, how we can improve it, whether there's other documentation for other projects that you love. So, packaging. I used to know so little about packaging, and then in 2017, a friend of mine was like, "Hey, what?" Anyway. But in any case, since I first dipped my toe into the world of Python, the tutorials and the guidance at packaging.python.org have gotten way better. And there is actually a wonderful tutorial at packaging.python.org in case you've never made a package. If you go through that tutorial, it might take you maybe 30 to 120 minutes. Learn how to make a package if you already know how to program in Python at least a little bit. It'll demystify the process for you. Packaging will no longer possibly feel as intimidating. And then if you have a chunk of code that you want your colleagues or friends to be able to reuse, you can then make that package and they can pip install it, and you might feel like a wizard. It's so amazing. Like, they pip installed something I made. It feels like a kind of publication, like a kind of fame. I don't know, maybe you have different ambitions. I shouldn't make assumptions about what you want or are. So now back to the screen share, if the software will allow me. I started up a session. Let me just go back here. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about a thing that is confusing, which is the difference between installing a bit of software via pip from the Python package index across your entire system, across your entire computer, versus in something like a virtual environment. So I can look at what does this user account on this computer have installed globally using pip freeze. And then you see, okay, look, there's all this stuff. There's all these different packages that were installed. Um, but and by the way, I'm varying here. This isn't exactly the same way that it looks in the Markdown document in the guide. Um, I have a lot of stuff here. It's great that I've accessed all these modules, but this causes two problems. Because one is, what if I start working on two different projects that require different versions of a particular module? Like one of my code bases needs PyTwitter version 1, and the other needs PyTwitter version 2. And the second problem is, how do I keep track of and easily tell someone else what dependencies a particular application requires? Let's say I'm working on three different projects. Which of these, what does one of them need? I haven't told someone. So we isolate what gets installed in for what purposes using virtual environments. And sometimes you'll hear people call them virtual envs, and there's a variant called vems. So I will go here and I will create a new virtual env. I'm going to tell it that I want the version of Python that it uses to be Python 3. And I'll name it Sumana Test 2020. So it creates some bash files and things like that so that it knows. There's a great blog post on the Recurse Center blog about the particular, really fairly small bash scripts that help virtualenv do the things that it does. So now I activate it.
Sumana?
Yes, hi.
When you say there's a really great blog post, and you talked about the really great packaging guide, which is great, by the way. Is that in your Markdown file as a link so that people
They're
can
not.
refer back? No.
Yes, I apologize. I can add those later, especially if someone puts a note or two in the Zoom chat to remind me.
Great.
Yes, my apologies for basically, as I'm saying these things aloud, I am reminded sometimes of, this other thing I want to tell you. So I am in the Markdown file with my notes. I use virtual env wrapper, which provides some useful what's called syntactic sugar, right? Some handles. I'm not doing that on my spouse's computer because I found out very, very close to showtime that I could not screen share using Zoom from my laptop. So I had to adjust, and I'm not going to make it so that my spouse's computer has make virtual env on it. But here I am in a virtual env. And so if I look at what's here, pip freeze. All right, almost nothing, right? Some kind of default package. Let's say I pip install a MediaWiki client library. Okay, so it installs the things that it needs for that. And if I want to get out of there, I deactivate, which I will not do right now. So let's talk about some tools. So Python comes with a default tool you might be interested in looking at further, which is the interpreter, right? The command line environment where you can type one line of code at a time and you can see what Python does with it. You'll also hear it called a REPL, R-E-P-L, which is short for read, evaluate, print loop. When you install Python, it comes with the stock interpreter. So, all right, so I can do some kind of assignment in there, for instance, and I can, all right, there we go. I can write a function real quick. Did I mention it's someone else's keyboard? In case you see me doing a lot of typos. Okay. Yay! I'm glad that worked. One thing that I think not enough people know is that in the default interpreter, you can use help, and then it'll tell you about that object. It'll tell you some things that are true of it. what some of the methods are that you could call on it, like here. And just like on the command line, you can easily go back to something you have done in the past. So I'm using the up arrow now. And Control R, reverse interactive search. A space. All right. So I'm using Control C to get out of that. And I'm going to quit. Quit. I also want to mention another interpreter to you, which is really great for exploring new stuff. For many people who have been watching and listening to this entire thing, who have been using Python for some time, I'm about to tell you the first new thing in this whole thing. Python. So I'm going to install it using pip. Pip install Python. So now I'm going to run it by calling it on the command line. So it looks a little bit similar, right, in that there's the 3 arrow keys. Now I'm going to try typing. A equals, let's say, all right. Now A dot. Okay, so you can see that kind of like a fancy graphical user interface developer environment, but here within the terminal, it is showing me a discoverable list, right, of all the things I could do with this object. I'm going to hit tab. Let's say that I choose this. All right, so now I'm saying, well, okay, what shall I do with it? So open paren, and now here's a little hint of what I could do with it. I am going to try this a little bit again, because I can see that on the screen share it didn't necessarily come through as easily as I might have liked. Import, and then let's say M. Okay, here's a few things that are in the standard library and also something that I pip installed from PyPI, which is MW client. So MW tab, right. So it pops up information about what I can do. Let's say I say MW client. All right, so this is a module. What might I be able to do? Dot. Oh, look at all these things. Here's all these aspects within MW client. So let's say I decide site, and then left print. Oh, well, here's what I need to do in order to fulfill this. So I really enjoy this for trying out a new library and figuring out what I can do and what will be necessary. So it also lets you undo something that you've just done. So let's say I assign B equals 2. All right, fine. Now I've changed my mind. B equals mag. All right, so what's that is the value of B. I'm going to undo. Control R. Control R. What's the value of B? It's 2. Isn't that interesting? All
That's
right, I'm seeing
absolutely
a nod.
insane.
Who said that? Oh, hi, Juan. Yeah, it is. It's quite a thing, isn't it? It's wild. It allows some interesting exploring and debugging. All right, let me pause now and look at what I got left. And all right, I'm double checking something else, which is all right. We have about 45 minutes left. A lot of people don't know about another thing that is useful for debugging. So I think BPython is really interesting for exploration and for debugging. Also for especially debugging, using Control D to get out of here, is when you run a Python script, you can use the -I option. Let's see. Oops. All right. The -I option, when it runs the script and then it dumps you into an interactive session with the Python interpreter at the state it was at the end of the script. So you can dig around and see what values are stored. So I'm going to give you an example. Here is some, I hope, code that is reasonably legible. So first we have the hashbang line to say, please run this using Python 3. Then we are importing the random module from the standard library. I'm assigning original number is something within the range, or is the range, sorry, is the range from 1 to 10. So that's going to be a collection. And then I create a variable called toPrint and assign to it some random integer right out of that. And then let's print that. I think probably any given person watching this could improve this code, and that is okay. So, Python 3. Actually, let me just make sure. Python dash, okay, the default Python is Python, because that's what I said when I created the virtual one. All right, Python dash I introduction. So it printed out a number that was a random choice from that range. That's the number that. So now let's look at what all is available in here. Let's look at, hey, what is the value of toPrint? Huh, okay. What is the value of orignum? It's the range from 1 to 10. All right, so if I wanted here to do some kind of like random something using the random module, it's right here. So you can imagine how if I were in a situation where there was some really complicated code happening and a bunch of variables being assigned, like if you use -I, then the moment that it crashes, it spits you out here, and you can ask what is the value in this variable. So someone, I'm just going to look at very briefly at the chat. Someone asked, do you always try to upgrade to the latest Python 3 version? I do, but I don't really have a good reason other than wanting to keep up with the latest features. And someone says, I upgrade when NumPy, SciPy, and Matplotlib wheels are available, and they're sooner. I personally have not gone to the trouble of upgrading to the absolute latest Python 3 all the time. It is harder for me because I prefer to use the Python that comes with my package, with my, I use Debian Linux, and so I prefer to use what comes with the package manager built into my OS. And sometimes the very latest thing isn't always packaged there. I would like to get into the habit of having it available, if only to test with. Mike from the security group, of course, says using other people's Lego bricks is a space of study for security because the supply chain is part. Yep, I am actually a visiting scholar at the Secure Systems Lab at New York University, where that is one of the things that we study and try to improve. And someone also asks, will BPython be fully functional compared to pure Python? And will Python or BPython require more system and processor resources? I actually don't know. I would be curious about that. Okay. So debugging. Python-I spits you out after the script is finished running or crashed. Maybe you want to see what happens just before it crashes. Maybe you want to be able to kind of sketch and figure out what you want to happen next just before it crashes. So another thing you can do is you can use PDB, which is the Python debugger. And if you've ever set breakpoints in a program so that you can step through it, maybe in some other language, this will be familiar to you. So So up top, I import PDB. I create a function that all it does is return test. And then I set a trace. That is what sets a breakpoint. And the PDB environment is different from the regular Python interpreter. If you run this code, then it's like it puts you in a different environment, which lets you step through lines with the step or S command, like, okay, do the next step, do the next step, do the next step, or continue to the next breakpoint. Like you see that there's on this line PDB set trace, and then on this line PDB set trace. So if you continue, then you're continuing to the next one of those, or you can evaluate expressions. So I'm going to run Python demo of PDB. So you see where it says PDB here. That means that I'm in that environment now. So I'm going to use Control C, keyboard to interrupt. Oh, that's not going to, okay. So, all right, I quit out. I'm going to try it again. All right, so now I'm going to say step. Go ahead and continue to the next step. All right. This is, so remember that set trace. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. You know, there was a set trace and then print A, print B, and then another set trace. Step. Step. All right. Yep. So now I'm going to continue. All right. C is short for continue. And I said I wanted to print spam, but spam is not defined. So that was my own error. The most common thing you will do is set traces, but there's a lot more you can do, and I have some links in my Markdown file of a talk at PyCon and the reference manual and so on. So one more debugging tip is when you are just starting out, you may want to know what you have defined, right, and whether or not something is in your path so that Python knows how to get to it. So Python. So here are things, some things that Python knows how to get to already. And now I'm going to run dir again. I hit the up arrow a couple times. And now you notice that A is mentioned. So you can see if you've successfully defined a variable, it shows up in the list of strings in the current scope. I called it here, so it's returning it's in the global scope. And let's see, import, oops, sys. So sys is part of the standard library, and it has a bunch of useful functionality in it, like sys.path. If you've ever tried to install some Python library and it doesn't show up in this, when you import sys and say what's in sys.path, like the directory that your library is in isn't in this big list, that is something you can follow up on, and someone else is trying to help you as you're doing investigation. I love, by the way, bpython and python-i so much that I made a tiny zine about them, and there's a link to that in the notes. Okay, a few favorite modules. I love random as a wonderful tool. So bpython import random. Here we are. Let's say a equals range of 115 a. So I've now created this range, right, of basically the numbers 115. So now I am going to give myself a random choice from that. All right, do it again. I remember one time, this was, I think, actually at a PyLadies auction. I saw that someone had not quite implemented, I think, the random dot choice element of something right. And so we saw this list of winning numbers for the raffle tickets, and they were all the same number over and over again. And that is amusing to me. That's all. Uh, since you are so often doing something like this, you don't, random makes it easier for you. You don't even have to do that initial step of creating the range. You can do this. Whoops. Random dot rand range 115. And hitting the up arrow and doing this over and over, right? So that's useful. Uh, random dot sample gives you a certain number of unique items from a list. So what is A? A is this. Okay. So let's say I create, and this is where I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste from what I made. Mostly, I understand from my training in the carpentries, software and data carpentry, that it's usually better to write to manually type things instead of copying and pasting when you are running a training, when you're trying to instruct people, so that it gives people more time to follow along. And if you make mistakes, then that's the kind of thing that it helps other people see what mistakes are likely to happen and how they can recover from them. However, when it comes to a giant long fiddly list of names as examples, I'm gonna copy and paste it so you don't have to waste time watching me struggle with commas. So here, for instance, let's say that I do let's see, what is nameless now? This is what's in nameless. Okay, random dot sample. And you see it, a bpython, it's so helpful, showing you, reminding you what order the arguments are going to be in. Nameless, comma, 4. So now give me 4 random items out of this collection. All right. And here's, that's nice. That's useful. Okay, let's shuffle this. Random dot shuffle name list. This will now rewrite that sequence in a list in place. So now name list has a different ordering. And if you just want a random float between 0 and 1, there is random dot random, like so. So I think this is a useful tool. Probably many of you already know about it, but it's worth poking around and looking at the different things it can do, especially because sometimes it has some kind of convenience method that makes it easier for you to do something like rand range, right, that you might have otherwise had to do in 2 steps. Next, I want to mention a couple more modules real quick. And this is where I will stop share and then share screen here. Sure. Okay. So here's the Python packaging user guide, which is so useful. Here is the zine that I made about bpython and python-i. I linked to both of those in the notes. And then I want to talk very briefly about a couple of things that I think are really interesting. ICS is part of the standard library. It lets you read from and write to calendar files. And I had a problem where a local museum showed movies. This is back, like in previous years when you could physically go to the movies in the United States. And their calendar files for events didn't have a proper end time. So I wrote this to download their calendar files and fix them and create a calendar file that I could then import into my local shared calendar. And so I import ICS here, and then here I grab, I take the calendar file that I'm getting from the movie theater, from the museum, and I say, all right, each of these events has a URL. I concatenate things together. I then I create a unified count. Anyway, so ICS is really useful, and I got a lot more understanding about how to fiddle with calendar files using because of a talk that I saw, and there's a link to that. Thank you, Christine Spang. There's a link to that in my Markdown notes. Um, I also, in another like weekend, I am mildly irritated project. I needed to look at some. Let's be real. I wanted to look at some Form 990s, which are the filings of some the tax filings for nonprofit charitable institutions in the United States. So I later found out, like after I had done all this work, that I could reuse a site that ProPublica had already put up. That's okay. I practiced. I practiced some things. So I was annoyed by dates, and I was like, man, why can't date time, part of the standard library, just do the right thing when, like, look, this thing is a date stamp. Can't you just turn it into a datetime object? Well, you know what library can? Arrow, which is not part of the standard library. You have to install it from the Python package index. It's totally worth it. Here, uh, arrow.get. So here is a thing in this filing that is like a last updated, some kind of a date type thing. And then arrow.get just figures out how to turn that into a proper date time thing. So I found that extremely useful. Thank you, people who made Arrow. It is available, and you should consider taking a look if you ever have to deal with dates and times in your code. So I'm going to stop sharing that. All right, y'all. One of the things that was of interest when we're talking about what shall I bring to PyLadies of Southwest Florida and Miami PyLadies and this variety of other folks is talking a little bit about my weird career, and so I'm going to do that a little bit now. I don't have a computer science degree. I took a single CS class in college. I didn't do great. I did not do great. Uh, you know who understands if you put an extra comma in things? People. You know who doesn't understand? Computers. This did not speak well for the computer. I mean, come on, right? So anyway, but more substantively, as a child, I programmed a little bit in a hobbyist type manner with my dad. And my parents really thought that, oh, yeah, our kid's going to be an engineer. Either that or a lawyer, because she sure argues a lot, but probably maybe a lawyer engineer. No, an engineer. This did not happen. I did not want to just do the thing that my parents wanted me to do. And like I said, I took a single CS class and didn't much care for it and didn't do great in it either. This was in 1998, before Google or Wikipedia or Stack Overflow. And it was harder to learn things in a self serve manner if you didn't have fantastic teaching support. Um, I took a political science class and loved it, and I thought the instructor was great. And that was what I majored in college. I still worked in the tech industry as a tech writer, but that's not coding, right? That's understanding technology and explaining it. And I was fine at that. I'd always been, and I would be again. And I continued working in the tech industry after college. After a sort of breather job as a bookstore clerk for a year, I started doing customer support at an online magazine. And then I thought, maybe I should figure out something else. I looked at a few different options. I went in this direction and that direction. And I realized that I should go into management and managing thing, trying to reduce the net amount of mismanagement in the world. really. Just like even if I turned out to be utterly mediocre and at the 50th percentile, maybe I would push someone out from the bottom, and so then I would lead that would lead to a net reduction in the amount of mismanagement. Uh, this was like caused by a combination of seeing simultaneously Hurricane Katrina happening in like on the world and national stage, and some not great management happening in the specific organization where I was in that moment. That I thought, yeah, that's not going to get you the results you want. I went to New York City because that's where then Fog Creek, now Glitch, had a software management training program, this apprenticeship program to rotate you through a few different jobs to learn a bit more about software management. So I did some of that. I did some other project management in a small web development shop. I got a master's in tech management. That was a nights and weekends degree from Columbia. Um, that was very much focused on like the Fortune 500 and people wearing suits and being accountable to shareholders. And I was much more interested in things like bootstrap startups and government and nonprofits. So, yeah, be aware if you're going into some kind of professional degree that you may be a huge weirdo. Maybe you already knew that. Maybe you already knew that that might be a thing that happens to you. Anyway, I was someone who had a bunch of experience in a lot of different little things. You know, I'd been a tech writer, I'd been a newspaper columnist, I had done a lot of volunteer, kind of like helpy stuff in customer service and tech writing and project management, stage manager for a theater. And then by the mid 2000s, I'd also started contributing a little bit to open source software, which I'd been using since the 90s. But it was only in the mid 2000s that I thought, you know, I'd like to actually learn a little bit more, get back into being able to at least be like a novice intermediate programmer. Python seems good. I'll use an open source project and try to contribute to an open source project that's written in Python. And I started contributing to a project for the first time, first as a tester. And then I, fairly soon after that, through honestly social channels, got my first project management job in open source software for a consultancy, where I was the first person they hired, I believe, who was not meant to be like a programmer. This has now happened a few times. I'm not sure it's great to be the first non programmer hire in a young organization. Just FYI. Has its flaws. I'm happy to talk about that in a non recorded onto YouTube forever medium at some point if you would like. But you sure learn some things. There's a friend of mine who told me the phrase, yet another effing opportunity for growth. And you know, I think some of us have had that. Anyway, so I got you know, I had a few project management gigs under my belt, and then I had this project management gig that was specifically focused on open source software. And I felt there was just so much that needed doing that other people had not done or had not seemed as important, or they'd been concentrating on other things. Things like documentation, not just like the one paragraph, what does this do, and not the detailed like method documentation, but that interim, that thing that's like a one page thing that tells you why did we make this, why should you use it, what are some basic use cases, and how would you integrate with it. And that was the beginning of my contributing on a larger level to what is project management, product management, and community management in open source software. Like so many people, I think I came into it as sort of damn it driven. Like, well, someone's got to do this. It needs doing. Okay, I guess I'll do it. Right. And so through a combination of that, in some cases paid and in some cases volunteer, that's how I started in that chunk of my open source software career, especially working with the GNOME desktop environment. So that was more than 10 years ago. And as it happened, ever since then, I've had some breaks in my career where I've taken some time to take care of family things or stuff like that. But all of my major paid gigs since then have been working in community management, project management, or similar things in open source software. I can program, and I got better at it when I went to the Recurse Center in late 2013, and then again in 2014. I leveled up my game on Python and other things, and I think it's important and useful that I can program. But the main thing I bring isn't to a client and to a job isn't the tap tap and the emitting of the functions and the classes, right? Uh, it's a larger, broader understanding of what it takes to make technology happen and make it useful, and the willingness to realize what question needs to be asked of the team members, ask it, and kind of not go away, but in a nice way until there is a substantive answer that we can act on. And I am currently working as a project management consultant on various open source projects. I'm working on pip. I'm working on autoconf, which is a build tool for Linux and other Unixes. And I am working on a book about how to get open source projects that are stuck unstuck. And yeah, I'm sure there's, I mean, I am now, I've been in software longer than possibly someone watching this has been alive. So there's more tail there, but I hope that gives you a sense of how, yeah, it didn't, the particular job that I have now is not one that I could have imagined when I was 14, and adults incessantly asked me, what are you going to be when you grow up? Me, I guess. So I should open it up a little bit to Q&A.